Welcome to Awakening into Life, where we host an ongoing series of conversations regarding the nature of non-duality, self-realization, and the embodiment of awakening, all offered freely from the heart of Bradley. In today's video presentation, we will be continuing our Campaign of Consciousness series and talking about loving yourself, trusting yourself, and honoring your own journey. Hello, everyone. This is Bradley from awakeningintolife.com. And I want to welcome you to the second session of our Campaign of Consciousness series. And tonight our focus is going to be on loving yourself, trusting yourself, and honoring your own journey. And this session is being presented on Zoom interactively for anyone who would like to participate. And this session is also being broadcast on Facebook Live. And so if anyone has any concerns or issues about being in either one of those broadcasts in those locations, you're welcome to turn off your camera, turn off your microphone. I want to afford people the opportunity to be conscientious of their own privacy. These sessions are also recorded and placed on the website so that, if you don't get a chance to participate in one of the sessions, or perhaps you want to go back and look at it later on, you're given the opportunity to do so. Sometimes people will listen once and then they'll go back a couple of months later, listen again, and hear something entirely new. So it's wonderful to be able to make these sessions freely open and available in that way. So this topic, last week, we spent some time talking about the nature of awakening. And I was really spending a lot of time talking about it as a psychological shift in perception. And that it's really something that occurs when we're able to look beyond the fabric of the veil, which is really sort of constructed out of words, out of language, out of meaning, out of symbols, out of the conditioned systems or conditioned mechanics of mind that that perhaps in the way that we were brought up, we've never questioned it or examined it. We've never looked deeply at how it is that we arrived at our subjective, constructed, perceptual overlay called the world. And most of us have never really looked at ourselves in such a way either, looking directly at who it is that we are, or who it is that we take ourselves to be, and shining the light of awareness and recognizing ourselves to be that awareness. To be able to step back from the voice in our head and say, if I can see the voice in my head, if I can hear the voice in my head, then I am not the voice in my head. Who am I? Right? And I am that which is aware. Okay. And then just really watching your entire world fall out from under you as you begin to realize what that means and how deeply the river runs, so to speak. So when I start this evening's conversation by talking about learning how to love ourselves, there's a bit of a paradox that we need to address right up front. Yeah, because what we were saying last week is that there really is no fundamental, no fixed, no separate self that can actually be found anywhere. that what we are is we're contextual in terms of the subjective perception that we're viewing the world through. So we're viewing ourselves, we're viewing the world through this lens of perception. And in that way, we are contextual beings. We are what we make ourselves into. We are what we believe ourselves to be. Yeah. And we're looking at everything through the lens of language. That's really what it is. It's language, the systems and structures of language. So if there's no fixed self, no separate self, no independent self, no I, me, mine to be found anywhere, then what the hell are we talking about when it comes to this loving yourself thing? How can I love myself if there's no self to love? I'm not sure I understand. So it's important to approach this paradox, right, with the warmth and the curiosity that we need to approach all things in life as we're beginning to shift from an inflexible, fixed position of mind to a very open, dynamic experience of our own hearts. And what it comes down to is most of us, you know, if I were to say to you, do you love yourself? Most people are not even going to think about it. They're just going to say yes. Why yes? Of course, I love myself. But if we actually look at and examine the content of our lives and the ways that we're living them, do our lives actually reflect the life of someone who would love themselves? Are the pieces and parts and functions, are the things that we're doing, the things that we're engaged in, are they fulfilling and meaningful to us? The relationships that we have, that we surround ourselves with, are they fulfilling and nourishing and meaningful? So these are the kinds of questions that we have to ask ourselves when we start to examine, do I love myself? And the paradox here is that most of us, we don't really love ourselves. And we're going to get into this. I'm not saying everyone, and I'm not saying to take that too tightly or too heavy a way. But as I get through tonight's discussion, what I'm going to demonstrate is that most of us are really clinging to our notion of self. Most of us are looking at life in sort of through a demand dynamic, through the mechanisms of desire and control. And that what we look at and think of as loving ourselves is really just a misunderstanding about the nature of love, about how we find true fulfillment and why life feels so unfulfilling so much of the time. So we're going to get into that. But what I'm saying here is that most of us, we don't really love ourselves because we don't necessarily understand what it means to love ourselves wholly and fully and completely in a healthy psychological manner that also understands who we truly are beyond this conceptualized notion of a self that's really nothing more than a complex of thoughts. And because we're clinging to ourselves, usually we're clinging to ourselves because of some sort of core wounding that we may have experienced in our early years in our childhood. You know, here the world is trying to force upon us all these conceptual notions of the way things are, the way things should be, who it is that we're supposed to be, and how it is we're supposed to behave. We have parents and we have grandparents and we have siblings and uncles and aunts and extended families and all of these people showing up in our lives with all of their own concepts and notions and beliefs, with all of their own undealt with traumas and confusion and conditioning, their own unexamined lives. And so they come into our worlds and they go, oh, well, this is just how it is. And you have to learn how it is. And then we become the inheritor, or we receive our inheritance from those who have come before. And we're conditioned into those family systems and cultural constructs. Some of us, though, have dealt with very significant and serious issues we're not just talking about poor parenting styles, right? Some of us, we suffered in various ways. A parent that either held on too tightly or didn't do anything at all to try to hold on. So people who were, parental figures or caretakers who were operating at extremes, at opposite ends of the spectrum. Some of us had wonderful caretakers who were right there in the middle somewhere. Some of us are carrying around childhood traumas of abandonment. Some of us are carrying around old hurts and old wounds that we've never really been able to dig into. And what's happened is the child that was injured, hurt, or harmed through whatever stages of life were unfolding for that child hid itself away, buried itself in the deepest recesses of our being, afraid to come out. And so this fear of being hurt, fear of being harmed, fear of being injured, fear of being judged, all these various fears, however they might show up for us, they sort of dominate our unconscious patterns of thought and behavior. And because they govern our unconscious patterns of thought and behavior, we put ourselves in a protective or defensive stance. We actively work to distance ourselves, to disconnect ourselves, and to distract ourselves from ourselves and from others. Because if we were to be vulnerable, if we were to be open, if we were to be authentic, we would be placing ourselves at risk. And we don't like that. We want to feel safe. And the best way we can feel safe is to protect and defend the borders, the boundaries, and the limits that define our notion of ourselves, our sense of ourselves. So that's what we're clinging to, is the wall that we've built around ourselves to keep ourselves safe. And in order to dissolve these walls, in order to break them down, so to speak, we have to learn how to have that sense of safety, that sense of trust, that sense of love present within ourselves. So that no matter what happens in our experience of ourselves or in our experience of the world, we're always able to come right back into our own hearts, right back into the essence of our own being, to be completely aligned and in tune with that, with the understanding of that as the true nature, as the true source of who and what we are. And we can't do that. We can't arrive at that understanding if we're going to continue to put up the protective walls and barriers and systems and structures. We have to learn how to open up and start by being authentic with ourselves. We have to start by learning how to love ourselves, even though there's no fixed, separate self that can be found anywhere. In order to realize that, you have to be able to allow for that to come in. And you can't do that if there's a wall. Most of the systems of belief that we're holding on to are part of that. Part of that barrier. And what's interesting is the stories, the narratives, the things that we tell ourselves, they're not true. You were not born into this world with language. It was conditioned into, and then you began to see the world through that lens. And absolutely everything that we communicate and experience through the lens of language is entirely made up. And yet our lives are governed by this fantasy. And this core wounding, these walls, this tendency to want to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves from being seen, really, even though that's one of the things that most of us want more than anything else, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. Well, you can't get any of that if you've erected these walls and barriers around yourself. It's impossible. So we may become resentful of the fact that we can't be authentic, even though we're the ones doing it to ourselves. Becomes a very interesting dynamic in that way. But this core wounding, and the way that we erect these walls around ourselves, that's what creates the sort of sense of separateness. Here I am, in my experience of myself, separate from you and apart from you in your experience of yourself. And again, I and you are conditioned conceptual mechanics of language. They're the way that we're conceptualizing our experience of reality. It doesn't make them true. Just because everyone agrees on something doesn't mean it's right. Especially if you start to study linguistic anthropology, if you start to look very closely at the ancient wisdom writings of every tradition, every spiritual discipline, you'll begin to see that this is the thing that they point at most regularly and with tremendous vigor. So that sense of separateness that we've established is really because we don't know how to love ourselves. We're actually working very hard to protect ourselves. So we erect the barriers of separateness as part of our own confusion. One of the other things that happens as a result of this core wounding is we begin to enter into a state of unworthiness. We're conditioned into a state of unworthiness. And there are two things, and I don't want to upset anyone, but it's important to call these two things out because they are important. And if we look objectively, we'll see that there is some sense of truth to what it is that I'm saying here. But these two things that have really conditioned the sense of unworthiness, first of all, are the Judeo-Christian ideas around sin, that we're all sinners, and that pretty much everything you do that you enjoy is a sin, and everything that you do that you enjoy is wrong. So that's one. That notion of sin, that's a really powerful force in our lives that conditions a sense of unworthiness. The other one is sort of the advertising, yeah, the way that we're advertised to in our culture today. You're not good enough, you know, just buy this new book, get this pair of jeans, drive this kind of car, get this kind of house, and then you'll be finished. You'll be fixed. Oh, but the moment you get that, then there's something else for you to buy, and something else, and something else, and something else, and something else. So you're never whole. You're never complete. You're a sinner on the run to the next thing that somebody's telling you need in order to be whole. Yeah. So this sense of unworthiness is it's the waters within which we swim. And it's everywhere. It's all around us. It's almost impossible to avoid. I would go so far as to say it is impossible to avoid. But when you know yourself as you truly are, you're no longer swept away. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So this sense of unworthiness is the belief that I'm not enough. That right now, right here in this moment, I'm not enough. There's something missing. There's something more. And that belief alone is what divides us from ourselves. That singular belief, I'm not enough. Right here, right now, I'm not enough. That is the singular sort of splitting point of our psychological self. And worse yet, this notion, I am not enough, becomes, and I will never be enough. So while I would say to you, do you love yourself? Right? And you would say yes, right? somewhere in the back of your mind, unless you've really examined and you've really done some very deep inner work and you've come to some very interesting insights that you can't explain or put into words, chances are this is happening in the background and you know it. You know there's a voice inside your head saying, I'm not enough right now, that there's something missing, there's something more, and that I'll never be enough. Somewhere in there, that's happening. Perhaps not for everyone, but for most of us, if we're really honest with ourselves. And then, because we're never good enough, and will never be good enough, we go into overdrive, trying to prove to ourselves and trying to prove to everyone else that we are good enough, that we are worthy. We might call it a pissing match because it's almost like we're in an argument or a conflict with ourselves that is forcing us to step up to life in a way that doesn't really honor who we are, and yet somehow we feel like this is what we have to do. And I'll come back around to that in a few moments. It's a losing game, this effort to prove to ourselves and to prove to others that we're worthy. You don't need any proof. You are worthy. I mean, your innate nature, your inherent being is wholeness and fullness and completeness already right here, right now. How can that essential essence of being, the undercurrent of reality, ever be unworthy? It's impossible. And yet the belief systems of the mind are so strong. They have a tremendous gravitational pull, almost like circling around a black hole. It's almost like you can't escape its gravitational power. And so then we end up playing these games of guilt and shame with ourselves. I did it wrong. I got it wrong. I keep getting it wrong. I'll always get it wrong. And because I got it wrong, I deserve to be abused. I deserve to be mistreated. I deserve to be punished. I deserve to be hurt. And again, most of this is not happening consciously. Most of us don't wander around from day to day saying to ourselves, I want to be punished now. It's happening beneath the conditioned mind. It's happening in our unconscious, unexamined psychological self. Part of that dance of guilt and shame, part of the game of guilt and shame that we play with ourselves, inspires tremendous self-doubt and self-judgment and self-abuse. That critic that's in the back of our head. Why'd you do that? You're so stupid. Why'd you say that? You're such an idiot. Right? We have these things that happen in our minds. And again, when we listen to that voice through an objective lens, the question becomes, is that really the voice of someone who loves themselves? Or is it somebody who's sort of condemning themselves to a sort of self-hatred? If you had your best friend in the whole wide world, you've been raised together, you spent all your days together for years and years and years, and you knew each other inside and out, and your best friend told you every day that you sucked, that you were the worst human being ever, that you got everything wrong. Would that really be much of a friend? Of course not. And at a certain point, wouldn't you sort of get tired of being berated all day long? And yet we carry this companion around in our very own heads. And a lot of these things, they lead to a sense or a state of loneliness, of disconnection. No one understands me. Right? I'm the only one with this particular set of problems. I'm the only one who gets it wrong all the time. I'm the only one who can't figure this out. I'm the only one whose life is absorbed in chaos. And so we find ourselves very lonely, standing apart from the whole, distancing ourselves, again, out of fear of being discovered. Yeah. If I were vulnerable, they would figure out that I don't know anything at all. They'd figure out what an idiot I am. Oh my God, I couldn't let that happen. I have to keep myself at a distance and wear a mask and pretend and play a game. And because we're in this place where we're separating ourselves, we feel as though we're excluded from basic normality. You know, we have this idea in our head that's been conditioned as well, this idea of normal. What does normal mean? This person or that person is normal. This person's family or that person's family is normal. There's a wonderful book by the folks who wrote the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, the 4th edition of it, who are talking about, as the 5th edition was being written, they felt that it was important to save normal because there's no such thing. And our efforts to define normal create abnormal. And in the manner of creating abnormal, then we have a new way in which we can separate and divide ourselves. We have ways that now we can diagnose a particular set of thoughts and behaviors that, you know, we don't like. Another mechanism or mode of judgment. And the truth of the matter is, normal and abnormal, they go hand in hand. One creates the other. And without either, we just are. We just are. So we start to feel excluded from basic normality because we're sitting here in our self-judgments and saying, I don't get it, I'm not getting it right. I'm the weirdo, I'm the black sheep. However it comes forward for you. Somewhere in the midst of all this, we begin to see ourselves as unloved and as unlovable. We would probably never say that out loud. We would probably never admit that to anyone. But so many of us are carrying around this sense that we are not worthy of love. We're not worthy of our own love, and we are not worthy of the love of others. This unworthiness can also present itself as a sense of deficiency. You know, how many of us have body images and issues around how we look or appear? How many of us spend a tremendous amount of time trying to look a certain way, trying to appear in a manner that's consistent with the expectations of our social and cultural circumstances? What about our intellectual acuity? I'm not smart enough. I'll never get into this program or that program. Oh, that test is going to be so hard. Oh, it's not worth my time or effort to even bother because I'll never be able to figure it out. Monetary. I don't have enough money. I'll never have enough money. So many of the spiritual paths that we encounter in today's society, particularly New Age and New Thought traditions, you know, there's a lot of emphasis around this term called abundance, right? Meaning the opposite of being deficient. Rather than being deficient, I'm going to be abundant. And that abundance is often calculated or described in monetary terms. And there's nothing wrong with this. I would never suggest that anyone's philosophical or spiritual system of belief is invalid. But as we go into this conversation about loving ourselves, there's something more important than money, than looks, than intellect, than success. There's something way more valuable and way more meaningful. that's way beyond any of these things. So this combination of things, this core wounding, the fear that it creates, the protectedness, the separateness, the unworthiness, the guilt and shame, the loneliness, the sense of deficiency. Wow, that's a heavy load. That's a heavy weight to bear in our lives. And many of us, as a result of doing so day in and day out, are relatively disillusioned with the way things are. Society is completely and totally screwed up. Somebody had better get in there and fix that, because I don't know if I can take it one more day, right? And it doesn't matter what your political affiliations are, or what your philosophical orientations are, or what religious tradition you follow. Every single one of us is casting our judgment out into the world as if it were a net, and we're hoping to catch the people who agree with us so that we can all stand together in a circle and complain about the difficulties the world faces. And for every single complaint you have, an idea you have about how to fix it, there's somebody on the complete opposite end of the spectrum with the complete opposite view of that position that you've taken. So we're not going to fix any of the things that appear to be wrong in our world by waging war with one another. There's a calling, a deeper calling. And the world itself is, I used to say in some of my teachings that instead of thinking about the world as this thing that should be better, should be like Eden, should be like Nirvana, perhaps the world itself is more like an incubator for awakening, and you need all the crap in order to force you into that disillusionment. Because only when you are fully and completely disillusioned are you going to be willing to start taking a deep look at who you are and what's really happening in your life. If you're just floating around, la, 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 life is great, everything's going my way, you have no reason to look. And some people go through their whole lives without ever having looked, and they go to their deathbed without ever having seen. So in many ways, I like to say our suffering is our greatest teacher. It's inviting us into a different kind of relationship with life. And our willingness to encounter our suffering, to encounter that disillusionment, and to see where it leads is incredibly useful, incredibly valuable. So here at this moment, let me see here. It doesn't look like we have a whole lot of people on in either Zoom or in Facebook Live, but that's perfectly okay. It doesn't bother me one bit. But I will ask here if there are any questions, anything that anybody would like to add based on what we've gone through so far.
Maybe you're going to get to it, but I'm just wondering, what if you have looked hard at some of the parts of yourself, but there are other parts that you know, like, you know subconsciously they're hidden in there, but you don't know how to access them?
Yep. Yes. So yes, we are going to get to that a little bit. You know, it's again, the main focus of this particular path, the way that I present this particular path is it's indirect. And part of the reason for that is because when we try to go after something, right, we have awareness around a particular behavior or pattern of thought that may underlie that behavior that's present within ourselves. And what we feel we need to do is we need to get in there, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to root that out, and we need to deal with it, right? That feels like the most logical way of handling the situation. And yet, when I was saying earlier, the only thing that keeps us from realizing the truth of who we are is the belief that we're not already whole and complete, right? And so when I say we are already whole and complete, I mean exactly as we are, right? Even with the stuff that's floating around in there. And it's the belief that says, oh, there's still something wrong with me. There's still something deeper, something more that needs my attention. Oh, if I could just grab the right wrench, or the right screwdriver and get that sucker out of there, then I'll be good, right? But how many times have we gone into this process of examination and gone, oh, I got it. Oh, I see. Oh, I'm good now. And boom, something else slides in to replace it. So it's a never-ending adventure of self-improvement. Yeah. That this process, and the reason why I make it an indirect process, is because we're not actually trying to fix, change, or correct anything. All we're doing is asking what's really true. And as we're asking what's really true, we're watching from the position of awareness, from the recognition of mystery. And we can move through life with one foot in each world. Here I am as this aware mystery of being, and yet I'm experiencing myself as this person. And we can hold both at the same time without sort of the tug and war of paradox. So yeah, we will talk about those things. This is very indirect though. It's about sort of using various tools and techniques and methods to realize that we don't need any tools, techniques, or methods. So I hope that helps get to that a little bit. I don't see anything on Facebook here, but that's all right. What I will say for the folks who are watching this as a recording, if you do have questions about these things, please feel free to go to the website at awakeningintolife.com and just send me an email. I'll be happy to answer your questions. I can do a separate video, or I can write a response. Whatever works, whatever is helpful. All right. So let's continue on here. So as I was saying, this sort of disillusionment with the world serves as an invitation to look, to ask questions, to examine, and to investigate. To ask ourselves why it is that life still continues to feel so unsatisfactory, which maybe it doesn't. Usually when we're a bit younger and we're excited about life and we're still really amped up on all the things that we told will be true, maybe we're not as disillusioned. Maybe we're very hopeful, and that's beautiful. I would never want to take that away from anyone. But I think the older we get, after you've, gotten the right degrees and you've gotten the right jobs and you've gotten the right house and the right car and the right relationship and the right kids, and you've got it all figured out, the picket fence, the whole 9 yards, and you're still sitting in your living room each day going, is this it? Is this really it? Like, okay, doesn't feel complete. So, the older we get, the more and more, this is why people, in their 40s, we have this thing called the midlife crisis. Most of us handle it by going out and buying something or doing something or changing something. But some of us, this disillusionment affects us in a different way and draws us inward. It draws us inward towards the true treasure of our very own selves. A lot of this disillusionment and dissatisfaction has to do with the way that we're trying to fulfill our longing for love. Because as I said earlier, most of us really we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be understood, we want to be appreciated, we want to be loved. It's very simple. You can see this in a young child. Child just wants to be paid attention to and loved. That's it. That doesn't change. That aspect of our human essence doesn't change. But rather than looking inward and discovering the love that we are already, what we are, we look for how we can fulfill our need for love in the world. So this means that, again, we're going out and we're adding things to ourselves. We're adding things to our lives. And that's how it is that we're demonstrating love. So, it's looking outside of ourselves for fulfillment, for things that serve us, for things that satisfy us. Now, every single thing, whether it's a feeling, a thought, an emotion, a sensation, an object, a place, a person, every single thing is temporary. There is no exception to this rule. And even if you were to get everything that you wanted, let's say your sort of spiritual discipline is one that includes the manifestation of your heart's desires, right? That's wonderful. But my question is, even if you get everything that you want, you then have to hold on to it. And at some point, it's going to disappear. At some point, it's going to fall away. At some point, it's going to be lost. And we're on a hamster wheel if we believe that finding our sense of fulfillment in the world outside of ourselves is ever going to lead to anything other than dissatisfaction. Because it's all temporary, it's all transient, it's all ephemeral, it's all coming and going, moving, shifting, and changing. Another thing that we do, this idea of love, is how do things make us feel about ourselves? Again, person, place, thing, idea, doesn't matter. Relationship. We're all looking for that ideal relationship, that perfect partner, right? So, but the question is, how do you make me feel about myself? We're looking at the other through as if they're a mirror, but we don't know. We don't know. We're not aware of how it is that we're looking to see the love that we desire reflected back to us through something external, something that is a person or a thing, an object. And it, you know, it's sort of like we love ice cream because of how it makes us feel. We love certain movies because of how they make us feel. We love certain people because of how they make us feel. We love certain philosophies because of how they make us feel. So that's really the things. I love the things that make me feel good. If we're really honest with ourselves, right? I love the things that make me feel good. I do not love the things that make me feel bad. I want to avoid them. So here we are in this sort of this back and forth process of desire and control. Meaning that if I can go out into the world and acquire and accumulate and get everything that I want and avoid everything that I don't want, my life will be perfect. I'll have it all figured out because my desires are being satisfied and I'm in control of every aspect of my experience, and I am able to avoid everything that might be difficult or challenging or hurt or harm me in some way. Again, we're really looking at life through this protective layer. Another thing we might do is, especially in relationship, we might start to make demands upon each other and say things to each other like, if you really loved me, you would, right? You would take the trash out. You would take the kids somewhere. You would buy me a new house. You would let me not work so that whatever it is. And it goes both ways. There's not any sort of one sex is more likely or less likely than the other sex to have. No, we are all in these power dynamics. All of us. It's part of our unconscious experience to just be looking at life as if life is made up of separate objects and separate things and separate people, separate entities. And again, if you loved me, you would make me feel good by doing these things. And you would not make me feel bad by doing these things. So this is an interesting, I've spent a bit of time sort of outlining what it is that makes up the world of our experience in this manner that's so dissatisfactory. that becomes our suffering, that makes us feel separate and alone, that goes back to the dance of guilt and shame, deficiency, disillusion. So I've talked about all the difficult things. This path, what again, this path is really present in every esoteric mystical tradition. And when I say that, what I mean is, within Christianity, you have the Gnostics, you have the monastics, you have the Christian mystics. Within Buddhism, you have, Zen masters and Vipassana, insight meditation leaders, and all of these wonderful people. The Ajahns, if you would, the Buddhas themselves, the Bodhisattvas. In Islam, you have the Sufi mystics. Right? In Judaism, you have Kabbalah. So every world tradition, every single one has at its center its own mystical heart. And it's inside the mystical heart that we find the consistency of all these different teachings. We can see, if we're looking clearly, if we're looking objectively, we can see that there's a vast commonality that we cannot explain away. Most people are busy looking at the differences between things. But when we're looking at this kind of a path, what's referred to as non-duality, which means not two, not separate and apart, no differentiation, no borders and boundaries, no subject object, only this mystery, this embodied mystery that's living itself. So this path is really about coming to that place within ourselves where that mystery is revealed. And those of us who are coming at it from a spiritual direction, there's a term that's used in the Hindu traditions and in other traditions as well. The term is the seeker, the one who's looking, right? The one who's on a journey to find. Yeah. And that one who's trying to find, right, is looking, is trying to get what's missing. Trying to find that something more or that something better. We're trying to consume the world, including all of its various spiritual teachings. Because even spirituality and the quest for enlightenment lives in the very same realm of name and form that creates all sense of separateness and all sense of suffering. And our quest, the drive behind the seeker, ultimately, is to escape. It's to escape and avoid our suffering. And we have read book after book after book after book after book after book. We've listened to teacher after teacher after teacher after teacher. We've seen the promise made 1,000 times over that if you just do these things, you practice these techniques, you meditate this long, you go off into this forest, or you do this thing, you'll find it. That elusive thing called enlightenment. And when you do, your suffering will come to an end. And I like to tell people, yes, of course, gurus say such things. You can't go fishing without bait. But the truth of the matter is there's a discovery in this place of non-separateness, in the discovery of our wholeness, not as, hi, I'm Bradley, I figured myself out and I'm a whole being. No, it is more along the lines of, hi, they call me Bradley. That's the name I was raised with, and that's how I identify. But I have seen for my very self that this idea of a body and this idea of a mind are not the end of who I am. The reality of life is that there is no separateness, no separation to be found anywhere. And here I am, all of life. I am all of life. All of life is me. That's all there is. All of life. Whether we call it God or consciousness or being or Allah, doesn't matter what words we use, that is what we are. This, just this, just this living mystery, expressing and experiencing itself in the realm of name and form. That's what's whole and complete. That is what can never be hurt or harmed or injured. That is seamless. That is eternal. It stands outside of time. It stands outside of space. Time and space are appearances within it, within who and what we are. So that's the path here. That's what we're talking about. And when you recognize that for yourself, it no longer means anything. Awakening, enlightenment, they're just more words appearing in the awareness that we are as aspects of the mystery that were drawing us toward our own inner light or drawing us into that mystery. And as we examine, as we look deeply, this whole process, as I've said before, it's a deeply psychological shift in perception. And it calls into question the role of identification, the identification with the body and mind experience. It calls into question the game or the play of attachment or clinging to people, places, things, ideas, experiences, trying to fulfill ourselves through that which is being externalized. The play or the dynamics of desire and demand. I want this thing, I'm going to get this thing, and when I have this thing, everything will be good. And it also plays itself out through the role of preferences, the way I want things to be or the way that I think things should be. It's amazing how often we should on ourselves and should on the world. The role that or the part of the process that we're unfolding into through this path is, or this pathless path, is the seeing through of the conceptual boundaries, surrendering into the mystery of love, learning how to accept and allow and let go, learning how to be fully present. And I say that word carefully because I've been part of different spiritual groups, and I even heard it yesterday when we were over at VegFest. Somebody was doing a presentation, and this person goes, "Oh, I'm trying to be more present right now." Rather than saying, "I'm trying to be present right now," rather than trying to make presence a goal, something that you move into or move out of or get or don't have, try not being present for a moment. Flip the whole equation on its head. It's impossible to not be present. Presence is your being. Presence must be present in order for anything else to happen. For you to be able to say, "I'm trying to become more present," there must be a presence there allowing for that movement of consciousness, allowing for that movement of thought, allowing for that expression of language. That presence is fundamental. So when I say learning to be more present, I mean that carefully. What I'm really saying is recognizing yourself as the fundamental presence, the fundamental awareness, the undercurrent of life, the mystery. And what the seeker's looking for and how it's really found doesn't look the way we think it would. Doesn't look the way we think it would at all. Again, most of us are looking for a particular tool or technique or thing that we can do. Because again, the mind is always creating and solving problems. And it sees the absence of awakeness or the absence of enlightenment or the absence of presence, whatever it is that's absent, wholeness, whatever it is. It sees that as a problem to be solved, and it's just looking for the right tool. And so it goes to all these places, right? All these books and teachers and teachings, and it says, give me the right tool. And you have many teachers who would be more than happy to give you a tool. Here's a tool, use this, use this, use this. By the way, that'll be $50, that'll be $100, that'll be $1,000. So you can have whatever tool you want and just pay me. Here's the bill. If you go to a sincere, authentic, realized teacher and you say, give me a tool or a technique, if they don't burst out in laughter, then you should move on. Because that is not what any of this is about. You are not a problem waiting to be solved. You are not a Rubik's Cube that's off color on all sides. It's more about peeling off all the stickers and realizing that it's all the same cube. You know what I mean? That's a rough metaphor, but so how do we really begin to encounter this thing that we might call loving ourselves? What does that really look like? What does that really mean? And I like to talk about love, not our conditioned conceptual notion of love, which I've already described as a desire and demand and you know, all of that. None of that, that's not love. I like to talk about love and what it truly is by covering it from the perspective of three main qualities. And these three qualities are love's cleansing fire, love's compassionate embrace, and love's playful dance. Love's cleansing fire is the process of disillusionment, is the presence of suffering. Love is inherent in everything as it is, right now, always. Because who and what you are is this mystery of being. This mystery of being is only always itself, and only itself exists. And in this way in which we're characterizing it as existence, as a self with a capital S, all of existence existing as a self, singular and indivisible, it loves itself completely. This is why every awakened being you've ever read about or ever spoken to or ever listened to, love is just emanating. It pours out of them effortlessly because they know already. There's no love love isn't something you do. It isn't something you get. It isn't something you give. It's something you are. Love is just another pointer, another word for God, another word for consciousness. It's all wrapped up in the same package together. And we'll talk about this more in the session on synchronicity a couple of weeks from now. But there's an underlying perfection that's inherent in the way of things, which includes our sense of dissatisfaction and our sense of disillusionment. But that cleansing fire, that's the thing that breaks us down, that breaks us open. So many of the people that I've spent one-on-one time with as a part of this series, we've had some very deep conversations about how the bottom fell out of their world, how everything came crashing down. And I know that when I interact with people through AA programs or other sort of recovery, in other recovery settings, you know, hitting bottom is a fairly common thing that finally brought somebody to the point where they were willing to do something. And the same thing is true here in this spiritual journey. Most of us have to hit bottom before we begin to really look. Again, you know, I've already said something to this effect. There's a common misnomer in a lot of spiritual disciplines around happiness being the highest goal. And there are a lot of people who make happiness their only goal in life. And again, this is really just another version of clinging and avoidance. This particular path that we're talking about, what we might define as love's cleansing fire, what's more important than happiness is truth. is the freedom that emerges out of the truth of knowing who we are and being willing to embrace who it is that we truly are. Being willing to embody that mystery, embody that love, and to recognize that just as we are right now, we are fulfilling love's call. This gets a little more difficult. I just want to say that up front. This gets a little more difficult. One of the things that we have, because we have these conditioned notions of love, and we think that the most important thing is to be kind to each other, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm saying be kind, please, be kind. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to things like guilt and shame, let us say that we go into an interaction with another person and it goes poorly, and we said something or we did something that was unkind, and we walked away and we're facing guilt and shame, right? Another way to approach this is to recognize I may not understand why I said or did what I did. I may not like what I said or what I did, but I acknowledge within the essence of my being that this particular interaction was a fulfillment of the whole. Because you don't know if that terrible interaction, right, as your mind wanders away with it, you don't know if that one moment or that one word or that one action shook something loose or broke that person open or becomes a seed that's been planted that's going to actually begin to flower a year or 10 years down the road. You don't know how this one particular interaction was the cornerstone of something that needed to emerge in their own experience. You don't know anything at all about what actually happened. You don't know. I don't know. I don't know what this interaction is. All the people that are here listening now, I don't know. I may say a word that gets somebody really, really caught up inside themselves. Oh my God, I can't believe you said that. And the way I see it is I see the beauty of grace moving through those words that create the discomfort, because it forces the person who's uncomfortable to be present with their discomfort and to ask where it's coming from. Am I uncomfortable because this person said this, or am I uncomfortable because of how I'm perceiving it and how I'm holding it? And if we're willing to look at things in terms of my perception of the world, my perception, not through the mechanics of blame, oh, you did this or you said this, but rather to just invite it all in and say, thank you, thank you, thank you for being a part of the process that is forever shaping me and maturing me and helping me see where I need to look where my work is. Thank you for showing me where my work is. I got impatient. I got frustrated. I got angry. Yes, I was a dick in that moment, but you know what? I'm walking away with a valuable lesson. And I promise you, even though I was a dick, that it's meaningful, and I'm going to take it into the future in a way that may help reduce my dickishness in the future. So this is all an aspect or a part of love's cleansing fire. This is not just about feeling good, and it's not about happiness, and it's not about joy. It's about the raw stuff of life. It's about the raw sewage of life. You know, again, if what we're really trying to do as seekers of awakening or as seekers of enlightenment is escape our pain and suffering, and it hasn't worked yet, that should be your very first clue that it's a crock. And I don't mean that in a way for you to say it's not worth it. What I'm saying is that you ultimately, enlightenment means being fully present with life as it is. That is the fundamental truth of what enlightenment really is. We sit in the non-separate nature of life in its wholeness. We recognize the intelligence of life that is present in everything as it is. We surrender into that, and we allow for life to do what life does through us, through others, through all manner and manifestation of experience, and we're just at peace with it all. And in that peace, there's joy. But it isn't a conditioned quality of joy. It isn't, oh, this is wonderful. It's, oh, I see why this is necessary. And I take joy in being of service to truth. I take joy in being authentic and vulnerable and open and real and raw. I take joy in being able to embrace all of who I am without having to hide. So that's all part of the cleansing fire. The compassionate embrace is really that part of this beautiful mystery that acknowledges us when we're in our pain and when we're in our suffering. Now, again, I'll talk more about this in the conversation about synchronicity a couple of weeks from now. But there is so much beauty that emerges out of the way that life holds us and cradles us and rocks us to sleep in our deepest and darkest days. And sometimes it's you're having a complete breakdown. Your whole world is falling apart. Everything's going wrong. And then the phone rings and it's a friend. Somebody who can listen and understand where you're at. Or you know, you're at your wit's end, you've had enough, and suddenly you remember there's one ice cream pop left in the freezer, you know. Or, you know, you're in the midst of just tearing yourself down, and then a happy little jingle comes across the radio. The car driving next to you, their speakers are blasting, and it's something that just gets you out of. And these are all ways in which life responds to us when we're using the raw material of life in order to examine and to deepen into our experience of life. Life itself is compassionate. Again, it doesn't mean everything's going to go right. I like to, you know, I'll just be a little challenging here for a moment, but, you know, a lot of people like to say that, you know, this whole journey is about happiness. And I say, well, you know, there was this guy named Jesus, and that didn't work out so well for him or his followers. You know, these guys were tortured and mutilated and suffered some of the most egregious physical and mental traumas imaginable, as did pretty much all the mystics in various traditions in various parts of the world. So if you think this is all about happiness, Jesus must have been doing it wrong. When you really start to look at things like that objectively, it begins to challenge your notion of what is this all about? He understood that this was about something greater than himself, and he sacrificed himself in order to honor that. His devotion to the truth was so complete that he gave himself up as a sacrifice to honor that truth. That's what we're being asked to do. Doesn't mean you're going to end up on a cross, but it does mean that you may find yourself in life in a way that is uncomfortable from time to time and is difficult from time to time. And then from time to time, you'll also find the hand of grace reach into your life and hold you in its tender embrace. There's a term used in a lot of spiritual circles called the dark night of the soul. And again, this is something you can find written about among the Christian mystics. I believe St. Teresa of Avila spends quite a bit of time talking about the dark night of the soul, as does John of the Cross, I believe, St. John of the Cross. And there are a few other places as well where this terminology is used. But the dark night of the soul is something to best be understood as those times in our lives when we're confronted so deeply with our own insanity that we are confronted. We are broken open. We are forced, we are pushed into great difficulty and disillusionment. And on the other side of that, whether it lasts a few hours or a few days or a few weeks or a few months or a few years, on the other side of that, there's insight, there's openness, there's comforting, there's compassion. That act of surrender, I don't want to say the act of surrender itself is rewarded. That paints the wrong picture. But what I will say is that there's an acknowledgement within the wholeness of our being, of our willingness, our devotion to truth. And there's a comforting in that, a compassionate, tender, comforting embrace. And that's really God just reminding us of how beautiful we are. Again, you can use your own language, consciousness, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. The last piece here is the playful dance. Most people like to skip directly over to the playful dance, but it does not work that way. You know, we want to hop, skip, jump, and just have a happy, wonderful, good old time. Rainbows and unicorns and all that. And it can be that, and it is that when we're open and when we allow. You know, I know that along my own journey, it was essential to learn to understand that everything must be met in the spirit of good humor, even when your life is falling apart. To be able to look at life as it's falling apart and saying, "Ha, you got me again. All right." And you can be present with that, with a good humor in your heart. Because the surrender, you've seen, I know in my own experience over these course of the last 5 years, I have seen the miracle every day. It is what it is, and it's so beautiful and so inviting. And it doesn't matter to me if I get dragged through hot coals. It doesn't matter. Life is still at play. Life is still at play. It's very difficult to welcome that perspective when we're in our separateness and our protectedness. But it is absolutely consistent with wherever you go and whatever you read by any great teacher or mystic or saint, they all say the same things. And there's a reason for it. We're not so caught up in the I, me, mine that God is supposedly here to please. It's you got to ask the question, who's really the boss here, you know? And when we can change our perspective to that tone of playfulness, you know, when Jesus had said, you know, become like small children again. Oh my goodness, you know, could it be any more obvious? So that's love's playful dance. And love is inherent in what's right here, right now. It's inherent in who and what you are when you can see past the imaginary borders and boundaries of the apparent separate self. I was with somebody the other day in a group, and they were saying something very kind, and then they mentioned that you know, they wished they could be like, or you know, exude something similar to what I was talking about or presenting. And my initial response was just, yes, but you are already that. You are innately that. It is only your mind telling you otherwise. That's the only difference, is you believe your mind. You believe the narrative, perceptual story that's being told by your mind about who and what you aren't, rather than allowing your heart to demonstrate to you who and what you are. I didn't say all of that at the time. It wasn't the right context. But that is such, anytime, I believe it's Adyashanti who says, whenever anybody comes to him and asks him, you know, what's the truth? He immediately looks and goes, you're playing with me again. because we know this consciousness is all that there is. And when this consciousness presents itself as being clueless or being ignorant or being confused, we are in a game. We are in that play of life. We are in the play of consciousness. It's right here. It's right now. There's no distance between where we are and where this awakeness or this enlightenment is. Lisa, my girlfriend, was reminding me just yesterday about a video. It's like a 5-minute video with the spiritual teacher Papaji in India. And there was this woman who was visiting. And you can find this on YouTube. I think it's called 5-Minute Enlightenment or something like that with Papaji. But he just asks her, he goes, okay, so you're on this journey to enlightenment. You're on this journey to yourself, right? And she's like, okay, yeah. And he goes, okay, so you're on this journey to yourself. Do you take a plane? Do you take a bus? Do you take a train? How far do you have to walk? Right? And when we think about it in those terms, there is no distance, and it becomes very, very obvious. What mode of transportation is required in order for you to arrive at where you are? If God or consciousness or being is all there is, if this omnipresence, this notion of omnipresence is true, it means that you are that, inseparable from it. It also means that love is inseparable. Love is interwoven and intertwined with the very fabric of life, because there's one life being lived everywhere. And love holds the whole world within itself. So these are all aspects of loving ourselves. And some of the things that we can do, some of the very specific things that we can do, because ultimately, you know, to love yourself means to free yourself from all of the ways in which you entrap and imprison yourself, all the self-limiting notions and views and beliefs and ideas that you have about who you are and who you aren't. You don't actually have to do anything. It's one of these paradoxes again, where some people will say, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, there's no one to be. And I agree wholeheartedly. And yet if you sit in your living room day in and day out, waiting for people to come to you and, you know, receive your wisdom, you're going to die of old age alone in your living room. There is something to do. The question is not, is there or isn't there anything to do? The real question is, who is the doer of all doings? And, you know, when there's an emergent quality of doing that comes out of your own experience and exerts itself in the world, that is the flow of this one. That is the movement of consciousness. That is the flow of the Tao, however we frame it. So some of the steps that we can take and some of the things we can do to practice self-love and self-compassion, which really means allowing yourself to be as you are. Really just, you know, I know for years and years and years, I had so many people tell me who I needed to be and how I needed to be. And they found fault with everything that I did wrong. And I believed in all of it. And I was completely unable to love myself as a result, because I was never good enough. And at a certain point, I stopped taking an interest in what other people thought, and I started to recognize the inherent beauty of my own being. And I began to see even those habits, even those things that were difficult or challenging to people, you know, things that other people didn't like, there was a reason for them to be present in me. And I began to welcome them. And what was interesting is, as I began to welcome the things that other people might point to and say, you need to fix that, they started to unravel themselves. They started to take care of themselves, not through Mr. Fix-It type of action, not as a problem to be solved, but as a recognition. Oh, I'm okay. And because I stopped telling myself I'm not okay, being okay began to be the emergent pattern. It became a repetitive emergent pattern, and then it ingrained itself. And that is what is true today. So self-love and self-compassion, being kind and gentle with ourselves, even in our most difficult times, even when we're getting everything wrong, to be really open, really loving, and really compassionate. And to offer ourselves self-care. I know that one thing that people will say all the time, especially when we have conversations about meditation and mindfulness, which is what we'll talk about next week, the first response from most people is, oh, I don't have time for that. Oh, okay. Neither do I. But you know what? I make time because I'm the most important thing in my life. And if you are not the most important thing in your life, that's worth looking at. It doesn't mean that you don't value other people, that you don't love other people, that you don't take care of other people. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that you understand the story about the oxygen mask on the airplane, that you have to put your own mask on first. If you don't have anything left in the tank at the end of the day because you've given it all away, you're not going to be of any use to anyone. All you're likely to do is become resentful and, angry and harbor that on your insides, and then berate yourself because you're upset about it and enter into this circular loop that just is a downward spiral. And then you grow old before your time. Another thing we can do, and this is really in the same line as accepting ourselves, is to meet ourselves where we are. Not to say, okay, in the future, if I do this or I do that or I do enough of it or if I do it right, someday in the future, something will happen. No, it's about meeting ourselves where we are right now. Okay, this is where I am. Oh, I have this thing. I have this issue. I have this problem. I have this challenge. Okay, that's what's here. Some quality of wisdom might say, hey, you know what? This needs attention. Needs loving, kind, tender attention. Doesn't need to be fixed, but it needs to be welcomed. It needs to be brought into awareness and examined. It needs to be given some room to breathe. It needs to be given an opportunity to reshape itself in its own good time through this process of tender loving care. Meeting ourselves where we are in this moment, being present with ourselves as we are in this moment, accepting ourselves as we are in this moment, challenging what needs to be challenged, facing what needs to be faced, looking at what needs to be seen, but just doing so in a way that isn't taking a hammer to our internalized experience of ourselves or taking a bat to the internalized experience of ourselves. Just gentle recognition. And really just recognizing our own inherent beauty. I mean, each and every one of us, you're all beautiful, incredibly beautiful. You're unique expressions of absolute love, of absolute presence, of absolute being. That's who and what you are. And that is absolutely beautiful. And there are parts of you as an individual expressed person or human being or whatever language works for you. There's something absolutely beautiful about who you are. There are redeemable qualities no matter how unlovable you may view yourself. There is absolutely beauty right there just waiting to be discovered. And if others can't see it, that's their problem. Just make sure that you're able to see it for yourself. And overall, surrender to the call of love. Surrender to the heart. Surrender into this sort of understanding that we're not separate, we're not apart, that this life is whole. This life is complete. This life is inseparable. And love just naturally pours out of you. It naturally exudes itself. And this enters into trusting ourselves. These are a couple of things that I'll get into here just a little bit. A lot of us, we don't trust ourselves because we don't love ourselves. I mean, why would you trust somebody you didn't love? Why would you trust somebody who, you couldn't trust? A lot of it are hesitance. The reason we don't trust ourselves or trust the aliveness of life is because we're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of being judged. We're afraid of failure. We're afraid of consequences. A lot of times, we're working with this definition of success that's been ingrained through cultural means, right? And that definition of success is the only thing we have in our mind, and our whole life is aimed in the direction of that definition. And anytime something goes even a little bit sideways over the course of our effort to acquire or get to whatever it is we're trying to make our life about, it's as if everything is going wrong. Oh my God, it's all just falling apart. But redefining how we look at success, if you go to bed each night and say, did I have a good day? Did I have a peaceful day? Did I have a loving day? Did I honor myself? Did I honor the people around me? Was I authentic and loving in my expression of myself, in my words, my actions, my behaviors? If that's our meaning of success, or if we start to redefine the purpose of our lives, not in terms of whether or not we can get to some goal, but rather, can you be fully present with this right here, right now as your goal? The whole purpose of my life is to be speaking these words right now. That's it. That's as far as it goes. There's nothing more to it than that. The purpose of my life is not to help anybody or save the world or fix anything or get anywhere or achieve anything. It's to be here right now speaking these words. That's it. It's right here, right now. So these are some things that we can do within our experience of ourselves to shift out of that place where we're fearful of making mistakes, we're fearful of being judged, we're fearful of failure, we're fearful of consequences, to look at that fear through the lens of the love that we are, and to begin to take risks, to see what happens, to be curious about outcomes, but not to hold on to them so tightly that they begin to make us miserable. Also, looking at our tendency towards self-doubt and where that's coming from. Right? Again, if we're not loving with ourselves, then of course we're going to tend to berate ourselves, and if we're berating ourselves, then we're also filled with tremendous doubt. Oh, that's probably not a good idea. I'm going to get it wrong again. So why should I bother? Right? It's part of a narrative, a false narrative that emerges out of past experiences perceived a certain way, perceived through a negative lens, perceived through the lens of someone who doesn't love themselves and therefore cannot trust themselves. And the other thing that I'll say here is to trust in our own direct experience. This is absolutely essential. We cannot trust in the words of another. We cannot trust in anything that someone else is telling us is true. It's worth listening with ears wide open to what sounds like wisdom so we can investigate it for ourselves. But to trust in that and that alone is foolhardy. We must take what it is that's being pointed at, bring it into our own lives, experiment with it, and see how it actually works for us. And to then set aside those things that don't work for us or make good use of those things that do. And recognize that sometimes there's a shelf life on the things that work. Sometimes we're going to go through a phase of life that has one set of demands and requires one set of approaches, and then something shifts within us, and then a whole new set of tools is necessary. That's the evolution of the human experience. Teachers can only point towards the doorway. You're the one that has to go through it. Lastly, honoring our own journey, because I know I've only got a couple of minutes here. Honoring our own journey is really looking at the cultural conditioning that we're contending with, the way the society itself is operating, how society defines success, how society, I talked earlier about the presence of sin as sort of a social construct that's very powerful in our society. I also talked about marketing in terms and advertising in terms of how that sort of cultural conditioning affects our society. So just being really aware of those and other undercurrents that are present within our cultural conditioning, to recognize that they are qualities of conditioning that we don't necessarily have to obey. We have the freedom to live life on our own terms. We really and truly do. It might not be easy sometimes, but we absolutely have the choice. Setting aside the fear of being judged and condemned by others. I remember somebody came to me a couple years ago, and was saying that they had partaken in the spiritual community, and the spiritual community was very negative. This person had had a very authentic awakening and was sharing some of her own insights with this group, and they kept telling her, no, 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 that's not true. This is how it really is. And it was completely reversed, right? This person had real authentic insights amongst a community of people who were living in a spiritual mind, right? And they were berating her, judging her, because her insights didn't make sense to them through the lens of their conditioning. And I told her, why would you listen to ghosts? You know, they don't know, they don't understand, they're not living inside this. That's not their world. Why would you allow them to have power over yours? We also need to recognize that we are on our own unique journey. We're not here to follow in the footsteps of another. We're really not. You know, it's sort of like life takes us in all the various directions that we need to go. It gives us the pieces and the parts of the puzzle that we're meant to assemble. Our job is just to show up and gather them, right? And you might go in one direction with one teacher one day, and or a book or an experience, and get something out of it. And then you go in another direction the next day. You know, you can have a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of Buddha and a little bit of Krishna. You can have all of it and recognize the wisdom, the compassion, the commonalities. And you can see what works for you on your unique journey, not as a carbon copy of some other being. There's something about taking responsibility within the river of surrender, right? So confronting that paradox that I spoke about earlier, where you can't just sit around waiting for life to happen. There is some sense of responsibility that goes right alongside surrender, the balancing act. We're actually going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that in the very last session. But we can't abdicate responsibility for our lives or turn responsibility for our lives over to another. That's how you end up in cults. That's how you end up in unhealthy social movements. That's how you end up, you know, being in conflict with yourself and with others. There are many people who feel a sense of safety if someone else is making their decisions for them, but I don't recommend it. Because you are the expert in your own life. You're your own teacher. You're your own authority. You know what your life has been about. You know what you went through when you were 3, when you were 10, when you were 15, when you were 30, when you were 50, when you were 70. Only you know all the elements and pieces and parts of your story. Even if you sat down and described your entire life to someone who was wrought with wisdom, they're still not going to know you wholly and fully and completely as this individual expression of beauty that you are. They're just going to get the highlights and the lowlights. You're the only one with the whole story. And so you have to acknowledge your own authority and your own expertise. And trust in your own heart, trust in your own wisdom, trust in your own compassion, trust in your own insight, trust in your own sense of presence and being and mystery and love. Because that's where it's at right now for each and every one of us, without exception. Even if we haven't seen it, even if we don't know it, even if we're not acknowledging it, even if we're not living it, it's living us. And that's the great secret of enlightenment. All right. I'm a little bit over time here, but I do want to offer just a few more moments. I ran through a lot of stuff. I had a lot of material I wanted to cover tonight. It's kind of good there weren't a lot of people on. But for those of you that are here, I want to open it up for just a few moments to see if there are any questions or anything that you'd like to add or share based on this evening's diatribe, you could say. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, what I will say is that next week, next Sunday, we will be covering mindfulness and meditation. And it will not be so much of what tonight was. Next week will actually be more experiential, will be more participatory. This is tonight, going through this loving yourself, trusting yourself, and honoring your own journey. It really is, this was about exposing all the places within which we are being dishonest with ourselves, and all the places where we can bring a new sort of radical self-honesty into the equation, right? It's about confronting the mind and the way the mind operates. It's about presenting an alternative narrative, and it's about bringing something else to the forefront of our conscious experience for the purpose of examining what was shared this evening and seeing what's true for us, what's really true for us, what's going on in our lives. What is it that's governing our experience of life? So I hope to see everyone again next week when we talk about mindfulness and meditation. As I said, it'll be more involved, more interactive. It won't be quite as much of a lecture as tonight was. It'll really be an invitation to get engaged in getting in here and looking out here in a new way. My thanks, everyone. So much appreciation. See you all next week.